Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Kathy. We are on part 23 of going through this book, Scientific Facts in the Bible. So we are still on the chapter of evolution and the Bible, which there's a ton of information and a very contested topic, as I've mentioned. So we will just keep going here. All right, so this paragraph is called Evolution and Irreducible Complexity. So it says, in his book Darwin's Black Box, biochemistry professor Michael J. B., an evolutionist, acknowledges a powerful challenge to Darwinian evolution, something he refers to as irreducible complexity. He gives a simple example, the humble mousetrap. The mousetrap has 5 major components that make it functional. If any one of these components is missing, it will not function. It becomes worthless as a mousetrap. Charles Darwin admitted, quote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down," end quote. And that's from his book, The Origin of Species. And it says, if we take the human eye, one small part of an incredibly complex creation, we will see the same principle of irreducible complexity. The eye cannot be reduced to anything less than what it is. It has thousands of co-equal functions to make it work. If we take away just one of those functions, the rest of the eye is worthless as an eye. How then did the eye evolve when all functions had to be present at once to give it any worth at all? And then here's another quote by Darwin from his book, The Origin of Species. Quote, "To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree." Okay. All right. And then this says, the author of the book says that he agrees that it's absurd because the focusing muscles in the eye move an estimated 100,000 times each day, and the retina contains 137 million light-sensitive cells. Okay. Evolution and the Age of Man. Okay. So this is a quote from Grant R. Jeffrey in his book, The Signature of God. It's a little long, but it has a lot of information. Okay. Quote, "The evolutionary scientists who believe that man existed for over 1,000,000 years have an almost insurmountable problem. Using the assumption of 43 years for an average human generation, the population growth over 1,000,000 years would produce 23,256 consecutive generations. We calculate the expected population by starting with one couple 1,000,000 years ago and use the same assumptions of a 43-year generation and 2.5 children per family. The evolution theory of 1,000,000 years of growth would produce trillions times trillions times trillions times trillions of people that should be alive today on our planet. To put this in perspective, this number is vastly greater than the total number of atoms in our vast universe. If mankind had lived on Earth for 1,000,000 years, we would all be standing on enormously high mountains of bones from the trillions of skeletons of those who had died in past generations. However, despite the tremendous archaeological and scientific investigation in the last 2 centuries, the scientists have not found a fraction of the trillions of skeletons predicted by the theory of evolutionary scientists. Grant R. Jeffrey, his book, The Signature of God. Okay, so there's just a couple paragraphs left in this chapter about evolution in the Bible. So this paragraph is called The Bible and Blood. Platelets play an important role in preventing the loss of blood by beginning a chain reaction that results in blood clotting. As blood begins to flow from a cut or scratch, platelets respond to help the blood clot and to stop the bleeding after a short time. Platelets promote the clotting process by clumping together and forming a plug at the site of a wound and then releasing proteins called clotting factors. These proteins start a series of chemical reactions that are extremely complicated. Every step of the clotting must go smoothly if a clot is to form. If one of the clotting factors is missing or defective, the clotting process does not work. A serious genetic disorder known as hemophilia results from a defect in one of the clotting factor genes. Because they lack one of the clotting factors, hemophilia sufferers may bleed uncontrollably from even small cuts or scrapes. To form a blood clot, there must be 12 specific individual chemical reactions in our blood. If evolution is true, and if this 12-step process didn't happen in the first generation, i.e., if any of these specific reactions failed to operate in their exact reaction and order, no creatures would have survived. They all would have bled to death. Okay, last paragraph. Fossil evidence points to Genesis account. And this is a quote from biochemist D.B. Gower. And it looks like an article called Scientist Rejects Evolution from the Kentish Times, which must be a magazine. Okay. Fossil evidence points to Genesis account. Quote, the creation account in Genesis and the theory of evolution could not be reconciled. One must be right and the other wrong. The story of the fossils agrees with the account of Genesis. In the oldest rocks, we did not find a series of fossils covering the gradual changes from the most primitive creatures to developed forms, but rather in the oldest rocks, developed species suddenly appeared. Between every species, there was a complete absence of intermediate fossils. End quote. Okay. And Professor H.S. Lipson has a quote here that they conclude with. Quote, we must admit that the only acceptable explanation is creation. I know this is anathema to physicists, as indeed it is to me, but we must not reject a theory that we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining me for that. Our next chapter, the last chapter, is science and evolution. So we will be going through that. All right. Thank you everyone for coming by. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and comment. I would love that. And I'll see everyone in the next video. All right. God bless.